Before you judge me, I hope you understand the context of this story. My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. I've lived most of my life in Cleveland, Ohio, where the winters are harsh and the people are even harsher when it comes to keeping up with technology. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband passed away when I was 45. My youngest, David, is now 28 and works as a software engineer in downtown Cleveland. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday morning in November. The wind was cutting through the bare branches outside my kitchen window, making a whistling sound that reminded me of my late husband's off-key humming. I was preparing breakfast when my old flip phone started ringing. Yes, a flip phone. In 2024. I know what you're thinking, but it worked perfectly fine for me. I could make calls, send the occasional text message with great difficulty, and that was all I needed. David had stopped by for his weekly visit, something he'd been doing religiously since his father died. He was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through his iPhone while sipping coffee from the mug I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago, the one that said, "World's Best Son," in faded blue letters. His dark hair, so much like his father's, was tousled from the morning wind, and he was wearing that gray sweater I'd knitted him last winter. When my phone rang, I fumbled with the buttons as usual. The caller ID showed Dr. Peterson's office, and I knew it was about my upcoming appointment for my blood pressure medication. As I struggled to answer the call, pressing the wrong buttons and accidentally hanging up twice, I heard David let out an exasperated sigh that seemed to fill the entire kitchen. "Mom? Seriously? You can't even answer a phone call properly," he said, not looking up from his device. His voice carried that tone I'd grown to dread, the one that made me feel like a child being scolded. "This is embarrassing. You're like a caveman trying to use modern technology." His words stung more than the Cleveland wind that morning. I felt my cheeks burn with shame as I finally managed to answer the phone on the 4th ring. The receptionist was patient, thankfully, as I scheduled my appointment for the following week. But David's comment echoed in my mind throughout the conversation, making it hard to concentrate on what she was saying. After I hung up, David stood up and walked over to me, his expression a mixture of frustration and what I thought might be concern. At 6 feet tall, he towered over me, and I suddenly felt very small in my own kitchen. "Mom, you need to get a smartphone. This is 2024, not 1995. Everyone has moved on from those ancient things." "I don't need all those fancy features," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady while stirring scrambled eggs that were starting to stick to the pan. "This phone works just fine for what I need." "What you need is to join the modern world," he said, shaking his head in that way that reminded me so much of his father when he was frustrated. "It's actually painful to watch you struggle with something so basic. Sarah's grandmother is 85 and she uses an iPhone better than you use that dinosaur." Sarah was his girlfriend of 2 years, a sweet girl who worked as a nurse at Cleveland Clinic. She'd always been kind to me, never making me feel stupid when I asked her to help me with my old computer or show me how to use the television remote when they visited. She had patience that David seemed to lack when it came to my technological shortcomings. "I've managed just fine without one for this long," I said, but my voice was getting smaller with each word. The confidence I'd built up over the years of surviving on my own, of raising 3 children without their father, of managing a household budget and keeping food on the table during the lean years, seemed to crumble under his disapproving gaze. David grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, the leather one I'd saved up 3 months to buy him for his birthday. "Mom, I love you, but sometimes you're just stubborn. And it's embarrassing when my friends ask about my family and I have to explain that my mother still uses a flip phone like she's living in the Stone Age." The word embarrassing hit me like a physical blow. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be someone my children could be proud of. I worked 2 jobs to put them through college, learned to fix the plumbing when money was tight, taught myself basic car maintenance so I wouldn't have to pay a mechanic. But none of that seemed to matter now. I was an embarrassment because I couldn't figure out a piece of technology. He kissed my forehead, but it felt distant and cold, like a duty, rather than affection. I'll see you next week. Maybe by then, you'll have figured out how to properly use that thing, or better yet, gotten a real phone. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the flip phone on the counter. The house felt emptier than usual, and not just because David had gone home. His words had created a space between us that I didn't know how to bridge. The kitchen, which had always been the heart of our family gatherings, suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. I looked around at the faded wallpaper, the family photos on the refrigerator, the ceramic rooster collection that had belonged to my mother. Everything in this house told the story of a life well lived, of a family raised with love and sacrifice. But apparently, none of that mattered if you couldn't operate a smartphone. That evening, as I watched the local news on my small television, in the living room I thought about what David had said. Was I really that behind the times? Was my simple life, my simple needs, something to be ashamed of? I'd always been proud of my independence, of my ability to handle things on my own. But maybe independence wasn't enough anymore in this digital world. The weather forecast showed snow coming in over the weekend, and I found myself wondering if David would still visit if the roads were bad. Would he even bother calling to check on me with my embarrassing phone? The thought of him staying away because he was ashamed of me was almost unbearable. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I made a decision that would change both our lives in ways I never could have imagined. I would prove to David that I wasn't the technological dinosaur he thought I was. I would get a smartphone, learn how to use it properly, and show him that his mother was capable of adapting to the modern world. What I didn't know then was that this decision would soon become a matter of life and death, and that the very technology I was afraid of would become the tool that would save my son's life. The next morning, I walked into the Verizon store on Madison Avenue with determination I hadn't felt in years. The building was modern and bright, with gleaming displays of phones and tablets that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The young man behind the counter, probably not much older than David, looked surprised when I approached with my flip phone in hand, like I was surrendering an old weapon. "I need a smartphone," I announced, my voice stronger than I felt, inside. My hands were shaking slightly, whether from the cold November air or nerves, I wasn't sure. "Absolutely! What kind of features are you looking for?" he asked, his enthusiasm genuine but overwhelming. His name tag read Tyler, and he had the same eager expression I'd seen on David's face when he talked about his work. For the next hour, Tyler showed me different models, explaining cameras, apps, internet speeds, and storage capacities with the patience of a teacher. Most of it went over my head, but I nodded along, determined not to appear as clueless as I felt. I settled on an iPhone 13, not the newest model, but Tyler assured me it would have everything I needed and more. "The learning curve can be steep for first-time smartphone users," he admitted as he rang up my purchase, the total making me wince slightly. "But once you get the hang of it, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. My grandmother went through the same thing last year." The comment about his grandmother stung a little, reminding me of David's comparison to Sarah's 85-year-old grandmother. But Tyler's tone was kind, not condescending, and I appreciated that he was trying to be encouraging. The real challenge began when I got home. The phone came with a manual thicker than my weekly grocery list, and none of it made sense. Words like synchronization, cloud storage, and push notifications might as well have been written in a foreign language. Simple tasks like making a phone call required navigating through screens and icons that seemed designed to confuse anyone over 50. I spent the entire afternoon trying to add David's number to my contacts. What should have taken 30 seconds stretched into 2 hours of accidentally opening random apps, taking photos of my ceiling, and somehow managing to change the language to Spanish before figuring out how to change it back. At one point, I must have activated something called Siri, because the phone started talking to me in a robotic voice that made me jump. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated. My fingers, which had skillfully kneaded bread dough and sewed countless patches on my children's clothes, felt clumsy and useless on the smooth screen. Every touch seemed to trigger something unexpected, and I began to understand why David had been so impatient with me. Maybe I really was too old for this. The phone sat on my kitchen counter like an alien artifact, its black screen reflecting the overhead light. I stared at it while eating my dinner of leftover soup, feeling defeated. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. That night, I called my neighbor, Ruth, using my old flip phone that I'd kept active for emergencies. Ruth was 73 and had gotten an iPhone the year before when her granddaughter insisted. She lived alone in the house next door, and we'd been checking on each other since both our husbands passed away. "The first month is hell," she told me over the phone, her voice crackling slightly through the old connection. I threw mine across the room twice, but my granddaughter was patient with me, and eventually things started making sense. The key is not to be afraid of it. Easy for her to say. Ruth's granddaughter lived with her and could help whenever she needed it. I was on my own, with a son who saw my technological struggles as an embarrassment rather than an opportunity to help. "I feel like I'm trying to learn a new language," I confessed to Ruth. "Everything is so complicated. I just wanted to prove to David that I'm not completely helpless." "You're not helpless, Margaret. You raised 3 kids on your own. You've been managing that big house by yourself for years. A phone is just another challenge, and you've overcome plenty of those." Ruth's words were comforting, but they didn't make the iPhone any less intimidating. The next few days followed the same pattern. Small victories followed by major setbacks. I learned how to answer calls, but accidentally hung up on Dr. Peterson's office 3 times while trying to put them on speaker. I figured out how to send text messages, but sent David a message that was supposed to say, "Good morning," that auto-corrected to "goose moaning" instead. David's response was quick. "Mom, what are you trying to say? And why are you texting from a different number?" When I called to explain about the new phone, his surprise was evident. "You actually got a smartphone? That's unexpected. Need help setting it up?" For a moment, I felt hope bloom in my chest. Maybe this could be our chance to bridge that gap. "That would be wonderful. Could you come over this weekend?" "I can't this weekend. Sarah and I are going to her parents' place in Columbus, but there are tons of YouTube tutorials. Just look them up. Look them up." On the phone, I couldn't figure out how to use. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I felt that familiar sting of disappointment. "Okay," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "I'll figure it out." "You will. It just takes practice. Everyone struggles at first." But I wondered if everyone's children were as quick to dismiss their struggles, or if everyone felt as alone as I did sitting in my kitchen that Saturday morning, snow beginning to fall outside, holding a device that was supposed to connect me to the world, but only made me feel more isolated. I spent the weekend watching YouTube videos on my old computer, taking notes on paper like I was studying for a final exam, and practicing what I learned on the phone. Slowly, very slowly, things began to make more sense. I learned about apps, about swiping instead of pressing, about the difference between Wi-Fi and cellular data. The breakthrough came on Sunday afternoon. I had been trying to figure out the camera function when I accidentally discovered something called location services. The phone could tell me exactly where I was, down to the street address. It could give me directions to anywhere I wanted to go. It could even share my location with other people. I didn't understand then how crucial this discovery would become. By Sunday evening, I had successfully sent David a photo, a slightly blurry picture of my coffee mug, but a photo nonetheless. His response came quickly. "Nice job, Mom. See, you're getting the hang of it." Those few words of encouragement meant more to me than he could have known. For the first time since I'd bought the phone, I felt like maybe I could master this technology after all. Maybe I could become the kind of mother who didn't embarrass her son in front of his friends. Over the next 2 weeks, I practiced every day like it was my job. I learned to use the weather app, the calculator, even figured out how to take better photos. I started following cooking channels on YouTube and discovered I could video chat with my sister in Phoenix. The phone was beginning to feel less like an enemy and more like a useful tool. David noticed the improvement during his next visit. "You seem more comfortable with that thing," he said, gesturing to my phone on the counter. "I'm learning," I replied, feeling genuinely proud of my progress for the first time. "Good. It's about time you joined the 21st century." His comment still stung a little, but I was determined to prove myself. I had no idea that in just a few days, this phone I was learning to use would become the most important tool I'd ever owned, and that David's life would depend on how well I had learned to use it. 3 weeks after getting my iPhone, I was finally beginning to feel confident with the basic functions. I could answer calls without panic, send text messages without too many autocorrect disasters, and had even learned to use the camera properly. David had noticed the improvement during his last visit, commenting that I seemed less technologically hopeless, which, coming from him, felt like high praise. It was a Thursday evening in early December when everything changed. The snow had been falling steadily all day, coating Cleveland in a thick white blanket that made the whole city look peaceful but treacherous. The weather reports had been warning about dangerous driving conditions, with temperatures dropping, below freezing and roads becoming slick with ice. I was in my living room, practicing with my phone's weather app to check the forecast for the next day, when David's ringtone, I'd finally figured out how to set custom ringtones, filled the quiet house. But it wasn't David calling. It was Sarah, and her voice was strained with panic. "Margaret." "Thank God you answered. Something's wrong with David." We were driving back from dinner and he started feeling sick. Really sick. He's pulled over en route. "I too, but he's not making sense. He keeps saying his head hurts and he's dizzy." My heart stopped. Route 2 was a long stretch of highway that ran along Lake Erie, notorious for accidents in good weather, let alone during a snowstorm like this one. The road was isolated in many places, with long stretches between exits. "Where exactly are you?" I asked, already reaching for my coat with one hand while gripping the phone with the other. "I don't know. I know we're on Route 2, but I can't see any mile markers or signs because of the snow." David was driving, and I wasn't paying attention to where we were. We were just talking, and then suddenly he said he felt weird and pulled over. Sarah's voice was getting higher with panic, and I could hear David in the background, his voice slurred and confused. "Mom? Is that Mom? Tell her I'm sorry about the phone thing. I feel really strange." The fact that David was apologizing and calling me Mom instead of his usual casual "hey" told me something was seriously wrong. David had been healthy his whole life, rarely even getting colds. "Sarah, honey, take a deep breath," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Can you describe what you see around you? Any landmarks, buildings, anything? It's so dark, and the snow is coming down so hard, I can barely see anything. There are some trees, and I think I can see water, but that's it." "Oh God, Margaret, what if he's having a stroke or something? He's only 28. My mind was racing. I needed to get help to them, but how could I direct emergency services to their location if neither Sarah nor I knew exactly where they were? Then I remembered something from my recent phone lessons, the location services feature I'd discovered by accident. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. Do you have your phone with you?" "Yes, but I don't know how to." "You don't need to know." "How? I'm going to help you. First, hang up with me and call 911. Tell them you need an ambulance on Route 2 and that your boyfriend is having a medical emergency. Can you do that?" "Yes, I think so." "Good. After you call them, call me right back. I think I know a way to find out exactly where you are." The next few minutes felt like hours. I paced around my living room, my mind churning with worry and trying to remember everything I'd learned about my phone. The location sharing feature, I'd seen it somewhere in the settings. Tyler at the Verizon store had mentioned it briefly. Something about being able to share your location with family members. When Sarah called back, she was crying. I called 911, but they're asking for mile markers or cross streets, and I don't know where we are. The operator said they have units in the area, but Route 2 is so long. David is getting worse, Margaret. He's barely conscious now. This was it. This was the moment when all those hours of struggling with my phone, all the frustration and embarrassment, would either pay off or fail me completely. My son's life might depend on whether I could figure out how to use a feature I'd only discovered by accident. Sarah, I need you to do exactly what I tell you, okay? On your phone, look for an app that looks like a green square with a white location arrow. It might say, Find My, or just show a location symbol. Okay, I'm looking. I think I see it. It's green with a white arrow. That's it. Open it. I was frantically trying to do the same thing on my own phone, my fingers fumbling with the touch screen as my anxiety made my hands shake. I'd watched a YouTube video about this feature just days ago, but doing it under pressure was completely different. It opened, but I don't understand what I'm looking at, Sarah said, her voice tight. With fear, look for David's name or picture. There should be a list of people or a map. I see his name. It shows a map and there's a blue dot. Perfect. Now tap on the blue dot. There should be options that come up. Okay, I see directions, share location, and some other things. Tap on Share Location, then look for an option to share with someone not in your contacts or to share via text message. My heart was pounding as I guided Sarah through the process. David's life was hanging in the balance, and everything depended on technology that just weeks ago had seemed impossible for me to understand. I think I did it. It's asking for a phone number to share with. Give it my number. I rattled off my digits, the same ones I'd had for 20 years. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text message containing a link. With shaking fingers, I tapped on it, and suddenly I was looking at a map showing Sarah and David's exact location on Route 2 near the Mentor exit, about 15 miles from my house. Sarah, you did it. I can see exactly where you are. I'm calling. 911 back now with your location. As I dialed 911 and gave them the precise coordinates, I realized that the phone I'd been so afraid of, the technology that had made me feel stupid and old, had just become the tool that might save my son's life. All those hours of practice, all the frustration and embarrassment had led to this moment. The dispatcher assured me that an ambulance was being sent to their exact location and should arrive within 10 minutes. But as I stayed on the line with Sarah, listening to her describe David's worsening condition, I knew that 10 minutes might be too long. Symptoms Sarah described and began treating David for what they suspected was a severe hypoglycemic episode. His blood sugar had dropped dangerously low. He's going to be okay, Sarah told me through tears as they loaded David into the ambulance. They're taking him to Cleveland Clinic. Can you meet us there? I was already grabbing my keys and coat. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the hospital was treacherous, with snow still falling and the roads slick with ice. But I made it safely, and when I arrived at the EOI emergency room, I found Sarah pacing in the waiting area, her hair still damp from the snow and her face pale with worry. He's conscious now, she said, rushing over to hug me. The doctors said you saved his life, Margaret. If we hadn't been able to tell the paramedics exactly where we were, if they'd had to search that whole stretch of Route 2, they said it could have been too late. We sat together in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, waiting for news from the doctors. Sarah explained that David had been diagnosed with diabetes just 2 months ago, but had been struggling to manage his diet and medication properly. The stress of work and the cold weather had triggered a severe hypoglycemic episode. He never told me about the diabetes, I said, feeling hurt that my son hadn't shared something so important with me. He was embarrassed, Sarah explained. You know how David is about appearing weak or needing help. He thought he could handle it on his own. When we were finally allowed to see David, he was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. The moment he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry about what I said about your phone, about calling you embarrassing. If you hadn't learned how to use that iPhone, if you hadn't been able to help Sarah find our location." I sat down beside his bed and took his hand. "You don't need to apologize for that now. The important thing is that you're okay." "But I do need to apologize. I was a terrible son. Instead of helping you learn, I made you feel stupid and old. And tonight, you're the one who saved me." Over the next hour, as David recovered and the doctors prepared to discharge him with a new medication regimen, he told me about his diabetes diagnosis and why he'd kept it secret. He'd been afraid of seeming weak, of needing help, of not being the strong, independent son he thought I needed him to be. "You know what's funny?" I said, adjusting his blanket like I used to when he was sick as a child. "I got that phone because I was embarrassed about seeming old and out of touch. I wanted to prove to you that I could adapt, that I wasn't the dinosaur you thought I was." "You were never a dinosaur, Mom. You're the strongest person I know. You raised 3 kids alone. You've handled everything life threw at you with grace." "I was just being impatient and stupid." Sarah, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, spoke up. "You know, my grandmother always says that every generation has something to teach the others. Maybe David needed to learn patience and humility, and you needed to learn that it's never too late to try new things." 3 months later, David and I have a new relationship. He comes over twice a week now, not just once, and often brings his laptop to show me new apps or features. On my phone, I've become quite proficient with technology. I can video chat with my other children, look up recipes online, and even use something called GPS to navigate when I drive to unfamiliar places. But more importantly, we've learned to be patient with each other. David has learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, and I've learned that admitting I don't know something isn't a sign of failure. When I struggle with new technology, he sits with me and explains things slowly, the way I used to sit with him and help him with his homework when he was young. The iPhone that once made me feel stupid and old is now something I use every day. I have photos of my grandchildren on it. I text with my sister in Phoenix, and I even joined something called Facebook to keep up with old friends. But most importantly, it's the device that helped me save my son's life on that snowy December night. Last week, David brought Sarah over for dinner, and as we sat around my kitchen table, the same table where he'd criticized my flip phone, just months ago, he made an announcement. "Sarah and I are engaged," he said, showing me the ring he'd bought. "And Mom, I want you to know that I'm proud to have you as my mother. I'm proud of how you've embraced new technology, but more than that, I'm proud of the woman you've always been." As I hugged them both, I thought about how much our relationship had changed. The phone that had once been a source of humiliation had become a bridge between us, a way for us to connect and understand each other better. Sometimes the things that challenge us the most end up being the things that save us. My iPhone didn't just help me save David's life that night. It helped me save our relationship and showed both of us that it's never too late to learn, to grow, and to change. Now, when David's friends ask about his family, he tells them about his mother who learned to use a smartphone at 62 and used it to save his life. He tells them he's proud of me, and that's all I ever wanted to hear.